The metal detector's shrill scream pierces the pre-dawn silence like a banshee's wail. Sarah Chen jerks backward, nearly losing her footing on the loose scree as the device goes absolutely haywire in her hands. The needle pegs completely to the right, the electronic shriek so intense it echoes off the towering cliff walls surrounding them. Something massive and metallic lies buried beneath their feet. Something that has no business being here, 13 miles from the nearest trail, at the base of a 200-foot granite precipice that hasn't seen human footsteps in decades. Jesus Christ, Sarah, turn that thing off. Marcus Rodriguez hisses, grabbing her arm as loose rocks tumble down from above. The sound is carrying too far in the thin mountain air, and they're not supposed to be here. This entire section of the Sierra Nevada backcountry has been closed to hikers since a series of rock slides last spring, but Sarah couldn't resist the pull of unexplored territory. Their headlamps cut twin beams through the darkness, revealing something that shouldn't exist. A corner of rusted metal protruding from beneath tons of ancient scree and accumulated debris. The object is completely buried, camouflaged by decades of falling leaves, animal droppings, and the slow accumulation of mountain weather. Only the recent rockfall has exposed this tiny glimpse of whatever lies beneath. Sarah drops to her knees, her breath misting in the frigid October air as she begins frantically clawing away handfuls of dirt and decomposed granite. The metal groans and protests as she works, its surface so corroded that rust flakes away like dried blood under her fingernails. But the shape is unmistakable, a military-style ammunition case, the kind used to store sensitive equipment in harsh conditions. This has been here for decades, Marcus whispers, joining her excavation efforts. His voice carries an edge of excitement mixed with dread. Look at this corrosion pattern. This thing was buried before we were born. If you love true mysteries, like and subscribe and comment where you're watching from. As they work, Sarah's fingers trace something etched into the metal surface, letters carved with deliberate precision. Even through layers of rust and grime, the words are unmistakable. Dalton, M.E., October 1977. Below the inscription, barely visible in the lamplight, are military dog tags welded to the container's surface with what looks like a camping torch. The realization hits them simultaneously. This isn't just any buried treasure. This is connected to Sergeant Mark Edward Dalton, the decorated Marine who vanished without a trace from these very mountains 13 years ago. The man whose disappearance became one of California's most haunting unsolved mysteries. But what's inside that box will leave you breathless. 13 years earlier, Sergeant Mark Edward Dalton represented everything the Marine Corps stood for. 2 brutal tours in the jungles of Vietnam, a Purple Heart earned while dragging 3 wounded Marines to safety under heavy enemy fire, and a reputation for never leaving a man behind, no matter the cost. At 33, he'd survived hell overseas only to find peace in the rugged mountains of California, where he worked as a survival instructor at Camp Pendleton, teaching young Marines the skills that might one day save their lives. Mark was the kind of father who never missed a school play, the kind of husband who brought Claire wildflowers for no reason other than they reminded him of her smile. Their modest base housing was filled with laughter, with the sound of 6-year-old Emma's endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether Daddy's medals made him a superhero. Better than a superhero, he'd tell her, lifting her onto his shoulders. I'm your daddy. October 14th, 1977 started like any other Friday. Mark kissed Claire goodbye at 0600 hours, his hiking pack already loaded, with enough supplies for a 3-day solo expedition into the Sierra foothills. He'd been planning this trip for months, a chance to scout new training routes for his Marine recruits, to map water sources and identify potential hazards, and maybe to find some peace in the wilderness that had always been his sanctuary. Be careful up there, Claire whispered against his ear as he held her close. The weather report mentioned possible snow at elevation. I'll be fine, he promised, his calloused hands cupping her face. 3 days, maybe 4 if the fishing's good. I'll be back Sunday night with stories and hopefully enough trout to feed the whole block. But Mark Dalton never came home. When he failed to radio in Sunday evening, Claire felt the first flutter of real concern. Mark was obsessively punctual, a habit drilled into him by years of military service. When Monday morning arrived with no word, she called Camp Pendleton, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. The search operation that followed was unlike anything the Sierra Nevada had ever seen. Every available Marine from Camp Pendleton deployed into the mountains, joined by National Guard units, search and rescue teams, and volunteer groups from 3 counties. They combed every trail, rappelled down every cliff face, and followed every possible route Mark might have taken. Helicopters circled overhead for weeks, their rotors thundering across the peaks as they searched for any sign of the missing Marine. His truck was found at the Whiskey Creek trailhead, exactly where he'd planned to park. His gear was gone, but there were no signs of struggle, no indication of what direction he'd headed. The trail register showed his signature, the last entry before everything went dark. For 3 weeks, the search consumed everything. News crews arrived from Los Angeles and San Francisco, turning the quiet mountain community into a media circus. Mark's photograph appeared on Missing Person, flyers in every store window. His story dominated local news broadcasts, and his family waited by the phone for any word, any hope. But the mountains kept their secrets. His disappearance shattered more than just his immediate family. Mark was the guy who organized the base's annual Toys for Tots drives, who stayed late to help struggling recruits master their survival skills, who remembered every Marine's birthday and made sure no one spent the holidays alone. When someone like that simply vanishes, it leaves a wound that never fully heals. Claire refused to give up. Even after the official search was called off, even after the Marine Corps declared him missing, presumed dead, she continued to believe her husband was out there somewhere, lost, injured, but alive. She drove to the mountains every weekend, hiking the same trails, calling his name until her voice gave out, leaving notes at trail markers in case he was wandering, confused, unable to find his way home. Until now, every lead led to dead ends. The last photograph of Mark Dalton alive shows him at Camp Pendleton's 4th of July barbecue, hoisting 6-year-old Emma onto his shoulders while she reaches for red, white, and blue balloons tied to a picnic table. His dress blues are perfectly pressed, his smile genuine and unguarded, and his eyes hold the kind of contentment that comes from knowing exactly where you belong in the world. In just 3 months, he would walk into the Sierra Nevada mountains and disappear forever, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. Emma's memories of her father are fragments, but they shine like jewels in her mind. Daddy teaching her to tie her shoes using the bunny ears method, sitting patiently on the bathroom floor while she struggled with the loops. The way he'd check under her bed for monsters every single night, his flashlight beam sweeping dramatically across the floor while he provided running commentary. Nope, no monsters here. Coast is clear, princess. His promise to take her camping once she turned 7, just the 2 of them under the stars. We'll catch fireflies and count shooting star, whacked, he'd said, his big hands gentle as he tucked her into bed. And I'll teach you to build a fire that even Paul Bunyan would be jealous of. Claire kept that camping promise alive long after the Marine Corps memorial service, long after the folded flag was placed in her trembling hands. Every year on Emma's birthday, they'd make the 2-hour drive to the Whiskey Creek trailhead, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers and a thermos of hot chocolate. They'd sit on the tailgate of their station wagon, looking up at the towering peaks, while Claire shared stories about the man Emma was already beginning to forget. Your daddy could start a fire with wet matches, Claire would say, her voice carrying across the empty parking lot. He could navigate by the stars, catch fish with his bare hands, and make shelter out of nothing but branches and determination. If anyone could survive up there, it's him. The official memorial service was held 6 months after Mark's disappearance, but Claire refused to let them bury an empty casket. She stood before the assembled Marines, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, and spoke words that would haunt everyone present. He's not dead. He's lost or hurt or trapped somewhere, but he's not dead. Mark Dalton would crawl through hell itself to get home to us. He would never leave us like this. Never. By 1985, the case had gone cold. The missing person flyers had faded from store windows. The search teams had moved on to other emergencies, and the Marine Corps had quietly transferred Mark's file to inactive status. But Claire never stopped believing. She learned to read topographical maps, studying every canyon and ridgeline. She took wilderness first aid courses, thinking maybe she'd be the one to find him, to bring him home. Every weekend she drove those mountain roads, her eyes scanning the tree line for any sign, any clue that might lead her to the truth. She checked abandoned mining claims, explored forgotten logging roads, and left notes in every trail register from Fresno to Mammoth Lakes. Local rangers knew her by name, and hikers grew accustomed to seeing the determined woman with the faded photographs, asking the same questions over and over. Have you seen this man? Have you seen anything unusual? She had no idea that 13 years later, two amateur treasure hunters would finally uncover the truth she'd spent her life searching for. The excavation takes 3 hours of backbreaking work in the growing dawn light. Sarah and Marcus work methodically, using their hiking poles and camp shovels to chip away decades of compacted earth in decomposed granite. The ammunition case is larger than they initially estimated, roughly 18 inches square and 8 inches deep, wedged so tightly between granite boulders that it seems deliberately concealed rather than accidentally buried. Look at this, Marcus breathes, running his headlamp beam across a series of deep scratches gouged into the metal surface. They're not random marks made by falling rocks or animal claws. These are deliberate human-made incisions carved with something sharp and precise. The scratches form what appears to be a crude map, showing landmarks and possibly even coordinates. Though the symbols are too weathered and corroded to read, clearly, as they work, they discover more evidence of intentional placement. The box isn't just buried, it's been carefully positioned and camouflaged. Flat stones have been arranged around its perimeter, creating a natural-looking depression that would be invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Someone took considerable time and effort to hide this container, and they did it well. When the box finally breaks free from its rocky prison, it's significantly heavier than expected. Something substantial shifts inside with a muffled thump as they carefully carry it to a flat, granite ledge 20 feet away from the cliff face. Sarah's hands shake as she examines the latch mechanism. It's corroded almost beyond recognition, but somehow still functional. The hinges groan in protest as she slowly lifts the lid, the sound echoing eerily in the mountain stillness. The smell hits them first, not the decay they'd feared, but something metallic and stale, like old pennies mixed with leather and dampness. Inside, wrapped in what appears to be a military-issue poncho that somehow remained waterproof after all these years, are Mark Dalton's personal effects, preserved in shocking detail. His dog tags lie on top, their chains still intact despite years of mountain weather. The engravings are crystal clear, Dalton Mark E, followed by his service number, blood type, and religious preference. These aren't replicas or memorial items. They're the real thing, worn smooth in places where they rubbed against his chest during countless training exercises and combat missions. Beneath the tags, they find a water-stained wallet containing photographs of Claire and Emma, their faces smiling up from plastic sleeves that have somehow protected them from the elements. The bills inside are still crisp, the credit cards unwarped by moisture, suggesting the box was sealed almost immediately after Mark's disappearance. There's also a compass, its brass surface tarnished, but still functional, in a small leather journal bound with paracord. But it's the sealed envelope that stops them cold. It's addressed in Mark's own handwriting, they can tell by comparing it to the journal entries. And it's marked with a single word that makes their blood run cold. Urgent. Below that, in smaller letters, if found, contact Marine Corps Intelligence immediately. Marine Corps Intelligence. Not the local sheriff, not the search and rescue teams, not even his commanding officer at Camp Pendleton. This suggests Mark's disappearance was connected to something far more serious than a simple hiking accident. The envelope shows no signs of water damage despite being buried for over a decade. The military-grade seal is intact, suggesting whatever's inside was meant to survive. Sarah turns it over in her hands, feeling the weight of folded papers inside, the bulk of what might be photographs or official documents. Should we? Marcus starts, then stops. They're holding evidence in a missing person case, potentially the last words of a man who vanished without a trace. Opening it could contaminate evidence, but leaving it sealed might mean the truth dies with them if something happens on their way down the mountain. The moral weight of the decision hangs between them in the thin mountain air. They break the seal, but the letter's contents remain hidden, for now. The dog tags catch the early morning light as Sarah lifts them carefully from the box. Their chains still intact despite years of mountain weather. The metal is warm to the touch, having absorbed the heat from her headlamp during the excavation. The engravings are crystal clear, as if they were polished yesterday. Dalton, Mark E., followed by his service number, blood type O positive, and his religious preference listed as Methodist. But it's what's etched on the reverse side that raises immediate questions. A second set of coordinates, hand-scratched into the metal, with what looks like a knife point or perhaps a military P-38 can opener. The numbers are precise, carved with the deliberate care of someone who knew these coordinates might be the difference between life and death. Sarah copies them into her phone, her fingers trembling as she realizes these coordinates point to somewhere else entirely. Somewhere roughly 8 miles northeast of their current location. Somewhere the massive search operation of 1977 never explored. The wallet tells its own heartbreaking story. Claire's driver's license photo, taken just months before Mark's disappearance, shows a young woman with hope and laughter in her eyes, her hair styled in the feathered cut popular in the late 70s. Emma's school picture reveals a gap-toothed smile and pigtails tied with yellow ribbons, her first-grade class photo showing a little girl who had no idea her world was about to shatter. But there are other photographs in the wallet, ones that don't fit the narrative of a simple family. Man on a recreational hiking trip. Pictures of heavy machinery, logging equipment, and what appears to be a makeshift camp in a heavily forested area. The images are grainy, taken with a cheap camera, but they show clear evidence of large-scale timber operations in what should be protected wilderness. Marcus opens the leather journal, its pages somehow perfectly preserved despite the years. The entries span several weeks leading up to Mark's disappearance, written in his precise military. Handwriting the early entries are routine. Training schedules, equipment lists, personal observations about weather patterns and wildlife migration. But as the dates progress, the tone becomes increasingly urgent, increasingly paranoid. September 15th, confirmed illegal logging operation in Sector 7. Trucks moving at night, no permits visible. Need to document before they finish and move on. September 28th, made contact with JR, says he has proof of bribes, falsified environmental impact, reports, wants to meet in person. October 10th, JR missed scheduled meeting. Something's wrong. They know I'm watching. The final entry is dated October 15th, 1977, the day Mark vanished. But the words visible on that last page make Sarah's blood run cold. They were right about the logging operation, meeting JR at coordinates 37.243, 1 degrees north, 118.5872 degrees west at 0600. If something happens to me, the evidence is hidden at the secondary location. Trust no one at Pendleton. Corruption goes higher than we thought. The rest of the page is obscured by water damage and what looks like dried blood, the ink bleeding into illegible smears. But those few words change everything about Mark Dalton's disappearance. This wasn't a recreational hiking trip gone wrong. This was a covert investigation that got him killed. We'll reveal that shocking message in a moment. The coordinates lead Sarah and Marcus on a treacherous 8-mile trek through terrain that hasn't seen human footsteps in decades. Following Mark's hand-etched directions, they navigate knife-edge ridges and boulder fields, their GPS units struggling to maintain signal in the deep canyon system. The landscape grows increasingly hostile with each mile. Ancient rock slides have created natural barriers, and thick stands of manzanita and mountain mahogany form nearly impenetrable walls of thorns. 4 hours into their journey, they find it, a hidden valley accessible only through a narrow slot canyon that Mark had somehow discovered and mapped. The entrance is so well concealed that they walk past it twice before spotting the subtle cairn, 3 stacked stones, that marks the way in. Beyond the entrance, the valley opens into a natural amphitheater surrounded by towering granite walls, completely invisible from above and nearly impossible to find without prior knowledge. The valley floor tells a story of systematic environmental destruction. Massive tree stumps dot the landscape like broken teeth, some measuring 8 feet across, ancient giants that must have stood for centuries before being felled. Deep ruts from heavy machinery score the earth, and scattered debris reveals the scope of the operation. Rusted cables, broken saw blades, and oil-stained patches where equipment once sat. But it's the makeshift camp that stops them cold. Hidden beneath a rocky overhang, they discover the remains of a sophisticated operation. Canvas tarps stretched between trees, metal folding tables, and dozens of empty fuel drums. This wasn't some small-time poaching operation. This was industrial-scale theft of protected timber, organized and funded by someone with serious resources. Sarah's phone buzzes with a text message, startling them both in the unnatural silence. The message is from her roommate back in Fresno. Saw your location on Find My Friends. That area's been closed since the logging scandal in the 80s. Be careful. The timing is eerie, as if the mountains themselves are warning them. Away they discover Mark's observation post built into a natural rock formation overlooking the entire valley. The position offers perfect concealment while providing clear sight lines to all the camp's activities. Inside the hide, they find more evidence of his surveillance operation, detailed sketches of the equipment layout, license plate numbers written on scraps of paper, and photographs documenting the systematic destruction. But it's the blood on the rocks that makes everything real. Dark stains cover the granite where Mark's position was overrun, where he made his final stand against whoever discovered his surveillance. Scattered around the area are signs of a desperate struggle. Torn fabric from what appears to be military fatigues, a broken compass, and bullet casings from both military and civilian weapons. Marcus picks up one of the spent shells, turning it over in his palm. 9mm, he whispers. Standard issue sidearm. Mark was armed when they found him. The realization hits them simultaneously. Mark Dalton didn't die in a hiking accident. He was murdered for what he'd discovered in this hidden valley, killed for trying to expose an environmental crime that reached into the highest levels of local government and possibly even military command. He murmurs, "He never hiked alone that day." The sealed envelope contains 3 items that rewrite everything they thought they knew about Mark Dalton's disappearance. The first is a letter, addressed to his wife Claire, written in Mark's steady military handwriting, but with an urgency that bleeds through every word. The ink has faded slightly, but the message is crystal clear. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, then they've found me. I'm so sorry for lying to you about this trip. This wasn't a recreational hike. This was something much more dangerous, and I should have trusted you with the truth. I've discovered something in the mountains, something that powerful people would kill to keep secret. The letter goes on to detail Mark's investigation into the illegal logging operation, but it's the names that make Sarah's hands shake as she reads. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, Mark's commanding officer at Camp Pendleton. County Supervisor Richard Walsh. Environmental Protection Agency Inspector Carol Henderson. All of them, according to Mark's meticulous research, taking bribes to look the other way, while protected wilderness was stripped bare. But it's the second item that changes everything. A small cassette tape wrapped in waterproof plastic, labeled J.R. Confession, October 14, 1977. The recording device might be decades old, but the implications are devastating. Someone named J.R. was Mark's inside source, someone with access to the operation's financial records and communication logs. The third item is a hand-drawn map showing not just the hidden valley, but a network of similar sites scattered throughout the Sierra Nevada range. Dozens of locations marked with GPS coordinates, dates, and estimated timber values. This wasn't an isolated operation. It was a systematic assault on protected wilderness, spanning multiple counties and involving millions of dollars in stolen resources. Jesus Christ, Marcus breathes, studying the map. This thing goes all the way to the state capitol. Look at these names. He points to a list written in the margin: state legislators, federal Forest Service officials, and corporate executives from major timber companies. Sarah notices something else in Mark's letter: a reference to the insurance policy hidden in a secondary location. If the logging operation was this extensive, if it involved this many powerful people, then Mark would have been smart enough to create backup evidence. Somewhere in these mountains, there's additional proof of one of the largest environmental crimes in California history. But as they study the documents, they hear something that makes their blood freeze. The distant rumble of helicopter rotors echoing off the canyon walls, growing louder with each passing second. What happened next will shock you. Stay tuned. The helicopter appears over the canyon rim like a mechanical predator, its downdraft whipping debris into tornado-like spirals across the valley floor. Sarah and Marcus scramble for cover behind the largest boulder they can find, clutching Mark's evidence against their chests as the aircraft circles overhead. This isn't a rescue. Helicopter. The unmarked black machine moves with military precision, and its occupants are clearly searching for something specific. Through the gaps in their rocky shelter, they watch three figures rappel down climbing ropes with practiced efficiency. The men are dressed in tactical gear, carrying assault rifles and moving with the coordinated precision of special operations forces. These aren't park rangers or search and rescue volunteers. These are professionals, and they're here to clean up loose ends that have been hanging for 13 years. They know about the box, Sarah whispers, her voice barely audible over the helicopter's rotor wash. Someone's been monitoring this area, waiting for someone to find Mark's evidence. The tactical team spreads out across the valley in a perfect search pattern, their movements suggesting intimate familiarity with the terrain. They're not searching randomly. They know exactly where Mark's observation post is located, exactly where he hid, his surveillance equipment. Whoever sent them has been planning for this moment since 1977. Marcus grabs Sarah's arm, pointing toward a narrow chimney crack in the canyon wall behind them. It's barely wide enough for a human body, but it leads upward toward what might be an escape route. They have maybe 2 minutes before the search team reaches their position, 2 minutes to decide whether to run or make a stand. The decision is made for them when one of the tactical operatives spots their backpacks near the entrance to Mark's hide. His sharp whistle echoes across the valley, and suddenly all three men are converging on their location with weapons raised. Sarah and Marcus bolt for the chimney crack, scrambling up the narrow passage as bullets spark off the granite around them. The climb is a nightmare of sharp edges and loose rock, their hands bleeding as they claw their way upward through the vertical maze. Behind them, they can hear their pursuers arguing about the best way to follow, buying precious seconds. Sarah's military surplus backpack catches on a protruding edge, and for a terrifying moment, she's trapped, suspended 40 feet above the valley floor, with armed men closing in below. Marcus cuts her free with his knife, and they continue their desperate ascent as the helicopter moves into position overhead. The pilot is trying to spot them through the crack, but the narrow passage provides just enough concealment to keep them hidden. Their only hope is reaching the canyon rim before their pursuers find another way up. 50 feet from the top, Sarah's strength gives out. Her arms are shaking from exhaustion, her hands are slick with blood, and she can't maintain her grip on the smooth granite. Marcus wedges himself across the narrow chimney and literally pushes her upward, his boots planted against one wall while his back braces against the other. Together they emerge onto the canyon rim just as the sun breaks over the eastern peaks, flooding the landscape with golden light. Below them, the tactical team has reached the base of the chimney, but they're too heavily loaded with gear to attempt the climb. The helicopter is circling frantically, its crew trying to find a landing spot on the rocky terrain. Sarah and Marcus have maybe a 10-minute head start before their pursuers find another route to the rim. They run. 5 miles from the canyon, crouched behind a stand of ancient Jeffrey pines, Sarah finally has signal on her satellite communicator. Her fingers shake as she dials the number written on Mark's map. A direct line to a retired Marine Corps investigator named Captain Elena Ramirez, who apparently was Mark's handler for this covert operation. The phone rings twice before a gravelly voice answers. "This is Ramirez." "Who is this?" "We found Mark Dalton's evidence," Sarah gasps, still breathless from their escape. "The box, the recordings, everything. We have proof of the logging operation, the bribes, all of it." There's a long pause, then, "Where are you calling from?" Sarah gives their approximate location, and Ramirez's response chills her to the bone. "You need to get out of those mountains immediately. The people who killed Mark are still active, still powerful, and they've been waiting 13 years for someone to find that evidence, you're in extreme danger. Captain Ramirez explains what really happened in October 1977. Mark wasn't acting alone. He was part of a joint Marine Corps and FBI investigation into environmental crimes on federal land. The logging operation was just the tip of the iceberg, connected to a massive money laundering scheme that funneled drug profits through legitimate timber companies. When Mark got too close to the truth, he was silenced by people with connections reaching into the highest levels of state and federal government. JR was James Robertson, a whistleblower inside the Environmental Protection Agency. Ramirez continues. He disappeared. The same week as Mark, presumed murdered. The cassette tape you found contains his confession about EPA officials taking bribes to falsify environmental impact reports. That recording could bring down politicians, federal judges, and corporate executives who are still in power today. But there's more. Mark's insurance policy wasn't just hidden evidence. It was a dead man's switch designed to automatically release the information if he failed to check in with his handlers. The system was supposed to activate in 1978, but someone with inside knowledge managed to intercept and suppress it. For 13 years, the truth has been buried along with Mark's body. The people chasing you aren't just covering up old crimes, Ramirez warns. They're protecting ongoing operations. The logging might have stopped, but the money laundering never did. It just moved into different industries: solar farms, wind energy, carbon credit trading. Your discovery threatens billions of dollars in illegal profits. As Captain Ramirez speaks, Sarah notices movement in the distance. The black helicopter has found them again, circling like a mechanical vulture about 2 miles away. Their pursuers aren't giving up. They can't afford to let this evidence see daylight. There's something else, Ramirez says, her voice urgent. Mark left a backup recording hidden in a safety deposit box in Fresno. The key should be with his personal effects. If you can get that recording to the media, if you can break this story wide open, then Mark's death won't have been for nothing. Sarah fumbles through Mark's wallet and finds it. A small brass key taped to the back of Emma's school photo. The key that could finally bring justice for a Marine who died trying to protect the wilderness he loved. Then, the ground rumbled beneath them. The rumbling isn't an earthquake. It's the sound of heavy machinery moving through the forest below them. Through her binoculars, Sarah watches in amazement as a convoy of federal vehicles winds up the mountain road. FBI tactical teams, Environmental Protection Agency investigators, and what appears to be a full company of Marines in combat gear. Captain Ramirez didn't just offer advice. She mobilized every asset at her disposal to protect Mark's evidence and his discoveries. The black helicopter that had been hunting them suddenly changes course, fleeing toward the Nevada border as federal aircraft appear on the horizon. After 13 years, impunity, the people responsible for Mark Dalton's murder are finally facing justice. 6 hours later, Sarah and Marcus emerge from the wilderness to find themselves at the center of the largest environmental crime investigation in California history. The evidence they recovered from Mark's hidden cache leads to arrests spanning 3 states and multiple federal agencies. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, now retired and living in Scottsdale, is arrested at his golf club. County Supervisor Walsh is taken into custody during a city council meeting. The conspiracy that killed Mark Dalton finally begins to unravel, but it's the reunion at Fresno General Hospital that provides the real emotional payoff. Claire Dalton, now 43 and graying at the temples, hasn't seen her husband's personal effects since the day he disappeared. When FBI agents place his dog tags in her trembling hands, she collapses into a chair. 13 years of grief and uncertainty finally finding release. Emma, now 19 and a sophomore at UC Davis studying environmental science, reads her father's final letter aloud to the assembled investigators. Her voice breaks when she reaches the passage where Mark apologizes for not being there to see her grow up, for missing her graduation, for all the camping trips they'll never take together. He died protecting the place he loved, Emma says, tears streaming down her face. He died so that other families could enjoy these mountains the way we did. That means something. That makes the pain worth carrying. The safety deposit box yields the final piece of the puzzle. Hours of recorded conversations between timber executives and corrupt officials, financial records showing millions in bribes, and photographs documenting environmental destruction across thousands of acres of protected wilderness. The evidence is so comprehensive, so damning, that federal prosecutors describe it as the most significant environmental crime case since Watergate. Mark Dalton's body is never found, but his sacrifice finally has meaning. The wilderness he died protecting will be restored, the criminals who killed him will face justice, and his family finally has answers to the questions that have haunted them for 13 years. 2 years later, the Mark Dalton Environmental Protection Act passes Congress with bipartisan support, establishing new penalties for crimes against federal wilderness areas and creating an independent oversight board to investigate corruption in environmental agencies. Claire Dalton stands in the Rose Garden as the president signs the legislation, wearing Mark's Purple Heart on her lapel and carrying a photograph of him in his dress blues. The trials that follow make national headlines. 18 people are convicted on charges ranging from bribery and conspiracy to accessory to murder. The timber companies involved pay record-breaking fines, and the damaged wilderness areas begin the slow process of ecological restoration. Environmental groups hail it as a landmark victory, proof that even the most powerful conspiracies can't bury the truth forever. Emma completes her environmental science degree and joins the newly formed Dalton Task Force, a special FBI unit dedicated to investigating environmental crimes on federal land. She carries her father's compass on every field assignment, following in his footsteps by protecting the wild places he died defending. Sarah and Marcus, now married and living in Sacramento, return to the Sierra Nevada every October 15th to visit the canyon where they found Mark's evidence. The hidden valley has been restored to its natural state, and a small bronze plaque marks the spot where Sergeant Mark Edward Dalton made his final stand. The inscription reads simply, "He never left a man behind." The canyon is quiet now, home only to the wind through the granite peaks and the call of red-tailed hawks circling overhead. But sometimes on clear autumn, mornings when the light hits the rock faces just right, visitors report seeing the figure of a lone Marine standing watch over the valley he died protecting. The black helicopter never returned, and the remaining members of the conspiracy have disappeared into federal witness protection or foreign exile. But the questions linger in the mountain air like morning mist. Captain Ramirez, now retired and living in Colorado Springs, keeps Mark's case file on her desk as a reminder that some mysteries take decades to solve. When asked about other missing persons cases, other environmental crimes that might still be hidden in America's wilderness, she simply smiles and points toward the mountains. What truly drove him to those heights? And will we ever know the full truth?